All right, today I'm talking with Ryan Murphy. Ryan's a former engineering manager at Yelp. He spent close to 20 years building engineering teams. And these days, he's running two things that I really want to dig into. One is EM Accelerator, which is a training platform for engineering managers. Basically, all the stuff that you should know as an engineering manager that you just don't get taught. And I'm really curious to talk about that because I was a former engineering manager. And the other one is Crying on the Sofa, which is a set of free, no judgment mental health events for people that work in tech. I'm also super curious and excited to talk about that as well. Ryan, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited about it.
You have a really interesting background. So before I even like kind of talk about the businesses, like, can you just tell me a little bit about like how you went from wherever you were at, right, into engineering manager at Yelp, which is pretty impressive. Like, what was that like?
Yeah, so I think I'll go a bit further back just to
For sure.
sort set the scene a little bit. So I got
Hmm.
into coding when I was like 11, 12, and the reason was at school we used to have computer lessons, and I'm showing my age a bit, but it was the first computers a lot of us had used, and the internet had become a big thing, and gaming websites was around, and they blocked the gaming websites, and me and my friends were really annoyed with that. So we said, how hard can it be to build another one?
Hmm.
And it turned out to be really difficult, and that's how it all started. So I started to build games and gaming websites, and that's how it all started for me. And then I eventually become a software engineer and all of that. So I eventually become a senior software engineer, and
Hmm.
my boss said, I have honestly, I haven't got the money to hire for an engineering manager. I'm going to be honest with you. Would you like to try it for a little while? And then I was like, Now thinking back now, it's such a toxic situation a little bit because it's like, okay, they're asking you to do more for less, but me being me, I was just so keen to do it. I was so
Hmm.
keen for the opportunity. I was like, yeah, I'm taking that. You can give me a pay cut to do it. And I don't advise anyone to
Jeez.
do that. That is like the antithesis of what I would ever recommend. But me being me when I was young and naive,
Hmm.
I took the chance. That's how it all started. And then from there, I thought I made a lot of mistakes. I started to do a lot of the work for the team. And I really started to learn that once people in my team, like there was an Ollie who become like a tech lead, and he ended up being amazing. And I found myself having such a large part of that. I fell in love with leading people, and I fell in love with growing them. And then from there, I started to go to a health tech company, and I just took a chance on myself. And I said, I've always wanted. I'm from this sleepy village in England. No one would have ever heard of it. I'm from a cobblestone road. I grew up in a big farmhouse, so the
Whoa.
very typical rural English upbringing. Very the typical
Wow.
stuff you see in the movies.
Okay.
That was my upbringing. Very fortunate.
Crazy.
Loved it. Very fortunate. Very beautiful upbringing because of that. So yeah, but what I'd never experienced was America, the big tech, the big
Hmm.
companies, the fast pace. I thought I'd challenge myself, and I applied for Yelp, and I actually had my first call with them, and they rejected me at first. However, Yelp being Yelp, typical fashion, what they did was they kept me in mind, and then they said, actually,
Hmm.
there's this manager that you'll be better under. And then a couple of months later, they gave me a call back because I'd be better working under a different manager. And he then went on, John Weatherford, then went on to become the greatest ever person I've ever worked with, and it's an absolute
Wow.
blessing. And ever since then, yeah,
That's wild, dude. Cool, yeah. So you're big time engineering manager. You hit the big jackpot, right? And then
yep,
you leave. Why did you
yes,
leave?
yeah. So I left because a few months before my mum had passed away. And I always felt like I had some handcuffs on, and I couldn't
Hmm.
really chase my dreams. Like even though I loved it, it was a great. I had a great people around me. I could never say anything negative about working there. It was fantastic. The best 5 years I've ever spent anywhere. It was amazing. So that is not why I left. However, I felt like I was not pursuing what I really wanted to do, and that
Hmm.
was make a life for myself. However, that would happen, and I would never really. I can't get to the end of it all without saying to myself, my mum would have seen my whole life go by and I didn't chase my dreams. And then
Mm.
I thought, you know what? I'm going to do it. Like, I'm going to save enough to try it for 6 months. And if it doesn't work out, I'm done. At least I tried. But in this 6 months, I'm giving it my all. And that's ultimately why I left. And I just spoke to the boss there and everything. And yeah, good luck. Wish you well. And what can you say?
Hey, that's awesome. I respect that.
Yeah.
Okay, we have some like similar stuff going on. I mean, it's
Okay.
interesting because I look at you kind of like an outsider in tech in many ways,
Mm.
right? Like you come from a what I would consider a non-traditional background. Because I think of the engineers I meet in San Francisco and stuff, they do kind of fall into like an archetype. You know,
Yeah.
some of the stereotypes are true, and I've always felt a bit like an outsider myself. You being a bit of an outsider too, and rising up the ranks like that, like how did that affect you, and how was that being a manager of a really top-notch engineering team at a massive, well-known company? How did you deal with that? Was there anything to deal with?
The biggest thing for me to deal with, honestly, was I'd never worked at such scale. So the biggest thing
Hmm.
for me was the distributed systems. That was one. So that's
Mm,
on like the technical side, but also technical people side. I thought I'd worked with smart people before. I'd,
hmm.
my tech lead was, for example, one of the early hires at Anthropic. So at OpenAI, for example. So like these people
Oh
were
wow.
crazy. And like I remember I was in one of my first weeks there, I was in a caching conversation with them because we were having we were basically our team owned the infrastructure behind purchasing. So any money that went through Yelp had to come through
Oh
us.
my
So
gosh.
we were
Jeez.
quite like a centrally important team. We were
Yeah,
talking about
right.
caching. And when you're talking about money, caching is quite important. So
Hmm.
do customers get what they pay for? Have you expired what they pay for, like undeservedly? So yeah, in the end, we decided not to do it. But the whole conversation around that was just mind blowing. And I remember sitting there thinking, I have no idea what you're talking about. I actually have no idea what you're talking about. And I think my previous, I was just honest with them. I just said, I don't have a clue what you're talking about. And I think they love that. I think they absolutely got a kick out of that, me just being that honest with them.
That takes some guts to say
Yeah.
that kind of thing. I think it also gets you like credit though, right? Like people hear that and they say, "Okay, I can trust this person at least," right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
when I thought of engineering manager and I was like a lowly junior developer, I thought, oh man, because my engineering manager did know more than me, and I thought once I know all this stuff, then maybe I can be engineering manager. That's
Yeah.
obviously the wrong way to look at it, but like how did you handle like managing really smart people like that? Was it intimidating, or did you feel like you had to like improve your own technical depth and capability, or did you figure out another way to like to
Yeah.
navigate that?
It was a bit of both. I made mistakes at first. I almost gave them a god complex in a little bit of a way. So I almost like
Hmm.
treated them as like these these like incredible people I could never reach their heights of.
Mm,
And that was a
yeah.
mistake I made as a manager. So I struggled with tougher conversations at first with people. I struggled with like my only real outlet was this extreme honesty. I think it's
Okay.
good for a while, but I think you need to have several tools in your arsenal. Otherwise, people learn to work around it a bit. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
yeah. So that for me was one of the big mistakes I missed. But after a while, once you lean into it, if you're a good human being, if you can rationalize, if you can adjust yourself, if you can check yourself, then eventually being around these people, you're only going to get better. There's only one way, and that's getting better. And so my leadership style had to really adapt to really because they were all very different people as well, right? We had people from
Yeah, I
Germany,
bet.
from Hong Kong, from China, from Canada, from Iran, Mexico. We had people from all different cultures, and I'd never used that before.
Hmm.
I'd only ever worked with people from sleepy little villages or from London and cultures I'd very like familiar with.
Yeah,
So
right.
I wasn't used to this, so that was a big change for me as well.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point you made too about like just leveling up. Like that's what I've noticed in my own career too. And probably everybody's felt this at some place, like whether it's in sports or in your career. You get around really smart people, and it's uncomfortable. At least it was for me, really uncomfortable.
Yeah,
But it's also the
yeah,
time I look back and I see those moments as like those were the pivotal moments when I grew the most, and I was, but it was the mental toll was really draining on me
yeah.
as well. So what led you to do EM Accelerator? Because you have this experience, you have a bit of this untraditional background, and you've gone to like some of the heights of the engineering land here. What led you to be like, you know what, I should make something for engineering managers?
I started it was actually I started charging for EM Accelerator because I did free coaching. So I
Oh,
every
okay.
year I do this program where I take two mentees for free. I usually end up taking about four because I can't pick between them. I end up taking about 2 to 4 mentees for free for a whole year.
Wow.
And great thing for me. So I'll post something on LinkedIn and I'll say the menteeship program's open, apply now. And I'll get lots of applications, typically like 1 to 2,000, and I'll have to pick about four of them. And the lessons I learned there are incredible. And I realized to myself, actually, I've really helped them with their communication to executive stakeholders. Actually,
Hmm.
I've really helped that IC who's become an engineering manager. I've really helped them go from being a doer to an enabler. I actually really did that. And I thought, I don't just I didn't want to do is just talk about one-to-one templates and how to enable one-to-ones. I didn't want to do that. But if I can teach
Yeah.
people how to adopt that enabler mindset, and if I can quiz people on how to do your first 90 days and stuff like that, I thought
Hmm.
that could be a real impact. So yeah, I thought, and also I was going to work, I wanted to work for myself, right? So I was always thinking, what should I do? And this was something that I
Yeah,
thought
yeah.
naturally leans into my skill set.
That's nuts. You do that for that long and for free. That is wow. That's awesome.
That was
What
lovely.
so people are listening to this probably thinking like, okay, what is an engineering manager? Because even me, like before I became one, I was kind of like, what do you do? Do meetings all day? Are you like doing technical documents? What in your opinion is the role of an engineering manager?
This is a really interesting question. Said to me, it's to make your team do good stuff. And I don't, I do
Sure.
agree with it, but I don't. But ultimately, you are there to make sure that your team is delivering business value. And
Hmm.
how you choose to do that defines your archetype as a manager. So, what is an engineering manager is actually quite simple, but what is your archetype as an engineering manager defines which sort of company you go into. Some companies want you to get them to deliver that business value by being deeply technical, micromanage, but not call it micromanaging, skipping around that micromanaging word. Everyone's had that sort of manager. Some companies want you to be on the peripheral of 3 or 4 teams and be heavy people leaders. Some engineering managers really thrive on being firefighters. So these engineering
Mm.
managers typically have heavy ops experience, might come from like a DevOps background, heavy infrastructure. I see these very typically in those sort of areas. That everyone's seen the teams in companies that have a constant on-call roster. They're constantly putting out
Yeah.
fires. They normally come from those backgrounds. So I actually think if you show me the engineering manager, I can show you their background, and I actually think that's quite interesting. Like, yeah. So for me, it's less about what is an engineering manager because it's ultimately the reason we're all hired, and I don't want anyone to get this twisted, is we are
Hmm.
there to deliver business value. Whether that's through code, whether that's through AI, whether that's for yourself doing it all, but ultimately you're there to deliver business value, and teams are the best way to do that. And how do you do that? To be a good engineering manager, is you need to enable a happy team. Happy teams are more likely to be a high performing team. So it's all about what is a high performing team. And happy teams have much more chance of being a high performing team. Diverse teams have much more chance of being a high performing team. Challenged teams have much more chance of being a high performing team.
Man, that the archetype you described, the on-call one type
Mm-hmm.
myself. I'm kind of curious what archetype I fell into. I did it wrong for sure. I was like I went from IC to engineering manager and thought, now I'm going to be the team lead essentially, which was a
Yeah.
naive way to approach the role. And I had to learn later on that actually I was going to be more of a people manager, and that taught me a whole lot. But before I get into that, people are probably wondering also like, well, how do I become an engineering manager? How would you tell somebody that's at senior level, like, how do they get into engineering management? I know it's kind of a loaded question. There's probably different in a lot of places, but like, what should they be doing, do you think, at a high level to do that?
Yeah, so the biggest thing you need to be showing your manager, and I have promoted people, not promoted, even promoted is the wrong word, but let's just use the word promoted just for argument's sake. But I have moved
Sure.
people into the engineering manager roles that are often actually some of the weakest on the team in terms of technical ability, because that's not what I'm looking for. And when I say they're weak on the team, that doesn't mean they're weak. It means you're in a team with people that are early open AI
Yeah.
hires. That's the sort of people
Right.
you're around, right?
Hmm.
So just to level that baseline, so how do you get there is you need to be showing that you're an enabler. So what I don't want to see is that you can communicate. What I don't want to see is that you can deliver a project. What I don't want to see is that you can write this wiki. What I do want to see is that you can create the wiki to show others how to write the wiki. What I do want to see is that you can create the communication doc which shows others how to communicate with exec stakeholders. What I do want to see is you setting up those brown bag sessions which shows others how do you lead this particular part of the project. I want to see you naturally and inherently being that enabler. And also, I will keep a very keen eye on things like incidents. So if there's a production incident, what I don't actually want to see is you rushing and going to fix it as an engineering manager. I want you to be present, but I want you to almost be that director. I want to see the person that's naturally directing things rather than the person that's diving in. And I think if you all think back in your
Mm.
teams now, I'm definitely highlighting people that do this and don't.
Hmm.
You definitely all thinking of people, and even yourselves, where you've stepped into roles that do this. And so that's what I want to see, really, is that. So you can ask me to be an engineering manager all you want. I need to see that behavior. So what I will do is give you feedback and say, actually, next time this happens, let's practice directing. Next time you lead a project, don't actually lead it. Step off and let the sub lead it and see how that goes.
I like
And
that.
direct them. Yeah. So I will work with someone. It will never be a no. I'll always work with someone because you never know what's going to happen. Yeah. And sometimes
Yeah,
I
that's
will,
true.
yeah. Sometimes I'll approach people and say, have you ever thought about this? This is because I think you'd be really good at this, because some people just might never thought about it.
You ever heard of this book, Multipliers, or read this book, Multipliers?
No.
It's kind of saying, I was asked to read this when I became an engineering manager, and it put up a lot of what you're saying as well. It's like your role is to really multiply the force of the team. And you said something interesting too. You said it's not a promotion. And when somebody told me that, I didn't take it seriously. And I'm like, okay, whatever. That's just some,
Yeah.
catchphrase over. It's not a promotion, it's a career change. I'm like, yeah, right, whatever. Why is it a career change when you become an engineering manager? Why is it not really a promotion?
It does depend on the level you're at. So if you're going from a mid engineer to an engineering manager, I think it's a promotion. But if you're going
Yeah, good
from
point.
a tech lead to or a staff engineer, it's definitely a career change. And when I went to being an engineering manager, I felt like a junior engineer on that learning curve all over again.
Too. Yep.
You, yeah, you're naturally more hands off. You don't go to the critical path anymore if you are hands on. You have to become an enabler, not a doer. It's a lot of the softer skills which we talk about, which really start you along a whole new path. So when I see a promotion, I see, okay, I've got these core sets of skills. Okay, I've got these core sets of skills, and in my next role in a promotion, I've just got to keep doing that and add a couple more on. Keep doing what I'm
Hmm.
doing. Whereas it's not a promotion because you're not using those skills. Those skills come in handy to know how to coach these people, to know what to do, to keep an eye on projects, to track progress. But I know a lot of engineering managers that are very successful that weren't that successful as software engineers, and they wouldn't have been promoted if it was the track.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point too, because I never felt like the strongest engineer on the team. What about this though? Why do you think there's so little information about what to do as an engineering manager? There's so much information out there. You can read books on, how to get to senior articles and stuff like that. And when I switched into management, I felt like I was just completely lost. I'm like, I don't know what the hell to do. And I just kind of started picking up books, and I defaulted to like how to run one-on-ones. That was the first thing I like looked at books for. But that didn't really give me the knowledge of what to do. And if I tie this back to the EM Accelerator program you're doing, what are you teaching people that is missing that so many engineering managers get wrong?
The gap is huge. The gap is so big. There's not much that exists. And what I like to do is I don't like to focus on here's how to do a one-to-one. I don't like to do
Yeah.
that. But what I do like to do is almost use war stories to coach and deliver that training through that. So I'm very honest in that you're not going to be the best engineering manager in the world at the end of this course. But what you are going to do is have a bunch of tools in your arsenal to take on the next challenge. I promise you that. You're going to be much more well equipped to take on the next challenge, because one of the ways I see it is we're moved into this role as engineering managers have a direct where you have a direct responsibility over people's lives and work, whether they like it or not, how much they preach about work-life boundaries, they bleed
Hmm.
into each other. No matter what you say, I've never seen someone that's done it that successfully. So they do bleed into each other. And as an engineering manager, you have such a big input over that. So I want to teach people that treat people like adults. Stop micromanaging them. Stop, treat them like adults. If they want to go to the doctor, who cares? Like, I'm going to teach you the systems engineering manager to do planning and to enable your team to deliver on those business goals no matter what. I'm going to enable that in you. I'm going to show you how to do that. So it doesn't matter about the small things like that. Stop focusing on the small things like that, because they are not scalable. If you focus on the systems I'm going to teach you on how to plan, how to delegate, how to make sure systems are in place to cope with anyone doing anything, what you'll do, that is scalable. But focusing on the little details, which so many engineering managers do, how do I run a one-to-one? What do I do if this person
Yeah.
goes on holiday? What do I do if an underperformer? Yeah, they're not. That isn't a scalable thing to teach. But what is engineering management systems?
Yeah, it's also not really a good way to have a happy team, like you said, too, because man, your manager, it really can affect your personal life. Like people, they always say this, like you don't leave a company, you leave a bad manager.
Yeah.
Totally true. And I do feel like as a manager, you have a deeper responsibility, like you've said, to be in a good mental state as well to lead. But like, what do you think about the idea that managers have to also be like kind of like self-regulated as well? Like you have to take care of yourself very well in order to be an effective engineering manager.
I I think it's an interesting one. I fully agree and I don't because it depending on what mood I'm in. So it's one
Yeah.
of these things that you need to be honest with your team, right? But also everyone's had that manager or that tech lead or the senior engineer on their team that whatever mood they are in defines the mood of the team. If so for me, if someone's feeling that way as an engineering manager, I'd normally look deeper than that into what is it about their team which relies on that so heavily. If you're having a bad day,
Mm,
if you're not feeling that great, what is it? What are you worried about in your team that's going to fall apart? And how can we resolve that so that that never happens again? So for me, I wouldn't look at that necessarily like, okay, you're like, let's say you're going through a depressive episode for months on end. I wouldn't look at that.
hmm
I would more look at, okay, what are we worried about and how can we put things into place that stops adding that to your depressive load?
mm. That's probably a bit much healthier to do it too. Also to have a system and an engine that works, just your own personal issues going on. Segue actually into the other thing I really want to talk about: crying on the sofa. Just
Yeah.
can you tell people what is crying on the sofa? How does this come about?
So Crying on the Sofa is an organization that I founded. We have events that focus on mental health. So it might be panels, it might be people standing up and speaking, it might be sharing. I'm very clear that what it isn't therapy and it isn't a place to come if you're in extreme need. What I can
Mm,
do on our website is, depending on locality, is advise you on the best places to go or places that you might want to go. But what I can't do is be that therapy. What we do is say, hey, come along, even if you've experienced mental health, bad, good, me, whatever that is, mental health before, come along and talk to people. I think it's just a super important thing to talk about. And the way it come along was, I remember it was about 3 or 4 years ago. I remember sitting on my sofa. I had a newborn son at the time, and I was
hmm
cuddling my son on the sofa. And my wife walked out to the kitchen to go and cook some dinner. And I remember just sitting there crying my eyes out. And I thought to myself, you know what? I better dry these tears before my wife walks back in the room. And when she walked back in the room,
mm,
I had my head down. I said to her, I'm going to walk to the shop to get some vegetables for the dinner. And I was like, this is a perfect segue to get out of the house and dry my eyes. And then I'm going to walk to the
jeez.
shop and get some dinner. And I remember walking with my head down and seeing someone and thinking to myself, I hope they don't see my eyes right now because they might see the pain behind it and something might happen. I remember thinking to myself, like, I better not show anyone my eyes. So I remember going around the whole shop, a head down and stuff like that. And my story's not even that dramatic compared to a lot of people. And for me, it was a few things that led to that. It was like illness, weight gain, but ultimately, and this is something I've never actually said to many people before, is I was actually diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And
Oh,
that's
okay.
not that's not something that many people know. And I didn't know it at the
hmm
time. I didn't know that was a situation at the time. And for me, I thought this was just life, that you had these ups, you had these downs. I thought
Oh,
everyone was like that. So for me, it got too much. It built up
yeah.
so much and it built up. It was like a boiling pot and eventually it boiled over. And then from that moment, in typical me fashion, I went to sort of someone straight away, started like seeing someone, doing like behavior therapy, saying, what could this
hmm
be? And I saw several different therapists to make sure I got like the right diagnosis and stuff because I didn't want to be diagnosed wrong or was there any diagnosis to happen? I wanted
Yeah.
that. So yeah, that's the story behind it. And I remember thinking to myself, there was a lot of dark days, honestly, mate, where I was thinking to myself, like, is tomorrow gonna be there? And I remember saying to myself, you know what? I can make tomorrow a better day. And then I remember thinking, when it was tomorrow, when it was the next day, I remember thinking to myself, if today was better, imagine how good next week can be. And that's what
Mm.
I sort of started this thing for, this crying on the sofa, was to say to people, you can make tomorrow a better day. And if that's true, just imagine what you're going to feel like next week. Imagine what you're going to feel like next year. I can promise you, you're going to be in a dark place, but I promise you, it can be better. And that's why I started this, is to try and at least get that conversation out there.
That's amazing. And I appreciate you sharing that because we and I said this a lot. We see people in their titles online or the fact they have a large following or the fancy job and all these things, and we think they got it all figured out. Their life is probably great. My life will never be like that. And that, struggles don't discriminate, mental health issues don't discriminate. And most of us have gone through something. Most of us are struggling with something, and it's important to have spaces to talk about that because it's not a lot. And it sucks too, I think, as a guy especially, you want to hide that stuff. You don't want people in your family seeing you say, "Oh, I got to hide this away. I can't let my family see me struggling." We all struggle with stuff. So how did you build this organization? I mean, did you do this? Obviously, this was the catalyst for it. It sounds like, right? And this led you to
Yeah.
create like a space for people to come together. And it's specifically. I mean, I'm guessing it's not like you don't exclude people not in tech, but you decided to focus on people in tech. Is there any reason why?
It's just niche. I my experience of work and my experience of entrepreneurship is they're saying niches. I think in America it's niches, right? Niches make
Yeah, niche
riches.
is yeah.
Yeah. So for me, it was that, and it's I wanted to stick to what I know. So what I didn't want to presume is how other industries affect people. But I
Mhm.
do know the tech industry quite deeply, and I do know uh, that it can affect you. And yeah, people like to get in the zone, and people like, and at the moment, like when I set it up, there was like a lot of remote working, and for me, I
Mhm.
suffered with remote working a bit. I now know I need to be with people in person, even though my lifestyle might say I want to be remote, but my mental health says I need to be with people in
Mhm.
person. So yeah, it was all about, yeah, just finding a niche that I could actually speak with some authority over.
That makes sense. I mean, and I feel you because like it's hard to like make assumptions about people in other different industries and how that affects us. Yeah, what is it about tech that like you think might be that kind of all these things that converge and make it maybe more ripe to, breed mental health issues or attract people with it? I don't know. Like what do you think about that?
I think I'm not necessarily sure it's the industry. I think it's, yeah, it's the sort of people that naturally are drawn there. So we're I think our brains are very analytical thinkers. I think we're very pattern-minded thinkers. When we have to look for code, we look for patterns, and
Yeah.
everyone's got that experience. So I think that naturally leans itself to maybe things like bipolar, ADHD, like other things like that. Is I think naturally you're going to be like, some people are going to be better than that than others. And I think that is
Hmm.
as a result of the way our industry needs to be, in terms of you need to find patterns, you need to be analytical, you need to be very logical. I think that naturally draws maybe a higher pull than other professions. But I also think our industry, and I'm quite proud of this, is we're the sort of people that will call out BS, and we will call out your BS. And we're very quick to talk about things. We're very, I think, as an industry generally, in my experience anyway, we're very quick to be open about things more than, for example, an alpha male dominated sales culture. I think we'd be much more open to talking about mental health and being open with our colleagues and having positive reactions to each other than you would in an alpha male sales culture.
Go. I wanted to ask you some quick hot takes if you don't mind.
Yeah,
Another segue.
yeah, let's do it.
Um, okay, people are saying, now with AI, organizations flattening, engineering manager roles, they're going away. What do you think about that? Do the engineering managers now have to switch to being super technical in order for them to keep their jobs and stability?
No, I don't think so. And I've got a fairly strong opinion on this, and I think it counters a lot of the rhetoric you hear out there. I think people focused engineering managers are actually going to become more important than ever.
Mm,
Because as we go from people who even remotely rely on each other to people remotely who rely on computers, I think that human element is going to be so necessary. Even if you have more direct reports, I can see it actually being, at the moment, there's a people focused, heavy technical focus, a bit in the middle. I think a little bit that bit in the middle is going to go. I think it's either going to be heavily people or heavily technical, like a tech lead engineering manager role. I
hmm.
think it's going to be like the roles are going to be one or the other. So yeah, I think it's going to be, but I will definitely lead into the peopleship side of the role because that's what I enjoy doing. And at the moment, you're hearing a lot of people go back into the technical side of the role that always preached how much they love people leadership and that they love doing it. And it's okay.
Yeah, yeah. Speaking of AI stuff, of course, I got to ask you this. What do you feel about AI coding tools? And what do you think about when people say things like, AI writes 100% of my code? Does it matter? Does it not matter?
It matters when the thing matters. So if, for example, you're a software engineer and you had your test to get in so there's a couple of types of software engineers, right? Roles. I've worked in one before where I've had to do data structures and algorithms, but really the
Mhm.
job was doing things like updating links on the footer and adding a field on the contact page to the form. That was the job. Then I didn't need to do that. So I think if you're coding in an area that is like that, then I think, does it matter that much? Probably not. But if you're like operations, infrastructure, then AI is super handy for enhancing logging tools and deployments and catching things early and even doing automated fixes on deployments that go bad. Like it's really handy for that sort of thing. But I say if it's more in the weeds, if it's further down the stack, i.e., like, yeah, like I said, like infrastructure and like it's a critical service, I think then you definitely want to have at least some visibility and knowledge. Because what's going to happen is you're going to lose the domain knowledge. So that's one of the main reasons to keep it is to do not necessarily by hand, but like have a deep understanding of what it's doing, is so that you can keep that domain knowledge in house, and when something goes wrong, you have that inherent knowledge as to how to fix it, rather than saying you do it,
Oof.
make it simple, you fix it 10 times over and then not doing it and getting frustrated.
Yeah, that does kind of freak me out the more and more I have leaned on these tools. So sometimes I'm like, wait, I don't really understand exactly what I've, in quotes, written here, what Claude has written. I'm beginning to lose some of that domain expertise that I need to have. And I've gone forth with this, but that's a really good point. Here's an interesting one. Who should not become an engineering manager?
People that love coding so much they couldn't imagine doing anything without it. So
Mm,
if you're the type of person that loves, you sit there and you're like, "Oh, I love," and this is one of the things that draws me out of being an engineering manager sometimes, is I used to love being in the zone with my headphones coding all day, fixing a gnarly bug. I used to
mhm.
love it, absolutely love it. And then for it to end up being absolutely nothing, just like a config for change you made 3 days ago. I love that situation. If that's you, and if you honestly said to yourself, you're never going to do that again, how does that feel? Because the chances are, I'm going to be honest with people, if you become an engineering manager, you're not going to be in a critical path. And the chances of you doing that stuff again are very slim compared to how you used
Yeah.
to. So if you're all right with that, then go for it. But if you're not okay with that, and I would seriously think about it, because that's going to be a real change for you.
That was a big change for me. I'm like, oh, I guess I'm not gonna be doing that anymore.
Yeah, and I genuinely believe being an engineering manager has made me a better human being. Learning from
Mm,
people, thinking about their struggles. 90% of my problems day to day are people problems. Not technical
yeah.
problems, not delivery. Working out how to get a project past a roadblocker is nothing compared to working out how someone's going to deal with the mental health situation of getting their family out of a war-torn country. That, like,
Yeah.
those problems don't compute. They don't
Yeah.
compare. And those are real situations I have faced in my life. And for me, like, I have become a better human being because I was so naive to what was happening. And I've learned about what was happening in people's lives and where they can come from. So I think a big part of being an engineering manager for me is I learned to be a better human.
Last thing is, where can people find you online? Where can people hook up with you, man?
Yeah, LinkedIn's the main place. LinkedIn's where I spend most of my time. I'm on all the others, but mostly, if you want to get hold of me, it's on LinkedIn. Other than that, EM Accelerator, crying on the sofa, if you send me email through them platforms, I will always respond. But yeah,
Awesome. I have links
LinkedIn.
to those in the show notes as well. I encourage people to check both those out, especially if you are a new engineering manager or you're already an engineering manager. It's the kind of stuff I wish I had found when I into that role. Super useful. So I encourage people to check that out. Thank you so much for being on the show today. Really, really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, thanks for being so open. You're so easy to talk to.